Welcome to the Let's Talk Crypto podcast, where we discuss the latest Bitcoin, blockchain, and digital asset news.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Let's Talk Crypto. Today, we have an exciting discussion about the latest fads that have been coming out in the last 2 years in the crypto space. And it's related to fundraising, basically. ICOs, STOs, and now the new IEOs. And to kick us off, Omar, what is an ICO?
An ICO is crowdfunding. So if I want to raise money for my project, what I can do is I can launch an initial coin offering. So that's what it stands for. And the coin or token is usually developed and launched on a blockchain, which is a public distributed digital ledger, which everyone can see if it's public. So once the token is issued, people can buy my token. But at the same time, that token does not represent any ownership stake in a company. And that allows the company owners or founders to make business-related decisions independently of their investors. So when you get a token or coin, and how do you buy it? You buy it with fiat currency, or you buy it with Bitcoin or Ether, which are the major cryptocurrencies. So once you get those tokens, it's like a promise from the founder of the issuer that if their business does well, then the price of the token could potentially go up and you could make a profit. So that's what an ICO is.
Okay, so for those who are new to the space or haven't heard of an ICO before, you're saying basically it's a fundraising mechanism for a company that doesn't give away equity in that company. However, they get in exchange a token. And what is the token? What is the use of the token if it has no equity tied to it?
If it's a token, because there's a difference between a coin and a token, but if we just start with a coin, basic coin, it might not have any added utility. For example, the coin could become something which could start off, all right, we're selling during our ICO, we're selling the coin we're selling 1 unit or 1 coin for $1. And then after ICO, we launch successful products, we launch successful services. And because of that, the price of our coin increases because our business becomes more valuable. So we're just giving people a coin, and that could be currency if it's a coin. So if it's a token and it has added utility, then that means that the token can be used for transacting on the platform on which the products and services will be launched.
Okay, I get that. And ICO, initial coin offering, sort of being borrowed from the term IPO in the more traditional sense, initial public offering. So a company comes along and launches a token, coin, a digital asset of some sort with either utility or it could be used as a currency, you're saying. Utility, an example, perhaps like, what could that be? A platform that like a trading platform that perhaps if you pay your fees off back in the token, you get a discounted rate. I think that's fair to use as an example. Is it?
That's good. I can give you an example for example, on EOS, they built a resource exchange. You can they're called REX tokens. So what resource exchange does is there are people on the EOS platform that want to rent out their CPU or network resource power. Okay. And there are buyers and sellers in that market. So if I want to get CPU power or network resources, I can borrow them from someone. And when I'm borrowing them, I have to give them REX tokens. So the token does not have any value other than for being used in that kind of transaction and is being done on the platform.
So it's sort of a closed loop economy, if I can put it that way.
In that scenario, yes, yeah.
However, perhaps with the added benefit, if the token is listed on a traditional exchange, that you can cash out into another currency pair, for example, into Bitcoin, and from Bitcoin back into fiat. So there is quite a difference there. Are there dividends paid in the traditional sense of when we look at the traditional stocks, or if people have got shares in companies, they can earn dividends? Would the token holder have any right to dividends?
They can and they cannot at the same time. Like I would not be able to make an absolute statement, and that's because there are so many new kinds of companies and products being launched. And the reason I know that is because my mailbox right now is full of new products and services. And regardless of how much time you spend in front of the computer, you could spend, like myself, I'm on here like 14 hours a day. And even though I'm on here so much, I still, like, I wake up and I turn on the computer and it's like all these new things. And I'm like, I'm never going to catch up. And to answer your question, whether you're going to get dividends or not, that might lead us into our next topic, which is security token offerings.
STOs.
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, since you've brought it up, let's move on to the next one. Before we dig too deep into each of them, let's try and define them. What is an STO?
According to my understanding, most companies, what they try to do when they do STOs is they're actually giving you a security. Because of regulatory pressure, a lot of ICOs were not allowed. They weren't allowed to conduct ICOs, like China banned them because people didn't exactly know what they're getting from buying these coins or these tokens. But when you get a security, you are actually getting a potential ownership stake in whatever company that is. And if that company does make a profit, you might be entitled to receiving some sort of dividend or monetary benefit from that. So it's like a regulatory compliant type of financial product.
Okay. Slava and Suyash, feel free to jump in at any time if you feel there's something to add or if we've got something wrong.
Yeah.
So STOs would be more in line with the securities laws, is I think what you are alluding to. And then the third one would be the newest one on the block, I believe, is the IEOs, if I'm not mistaken.
It might be good to have a bit more conversation around ICOs and STOs before we kind of jump into IEOs, because that's, like, in my opinion, like a much different idea. It might be like we're trying to introduce a lot of ideas at once.
Sure, but let's just give a high level sort of definition. I believe IEO stands for Initial Exchange Offering. Basically, where an exchange is involved with the company in the launching of the token. There's a lot more to it, but that basically just gives the broad definition of what it stands for, the acronym, and what it means. We can now dive deeper into what exactly that involves. Once, as you said, we've gone through the ICOs and the STOs. Yes, go for it, Slava. Please jump in.
Yeah, as Amar mentioned, the volume, the amount of new products that issue tokens or create coins on blockchain using blockchain is immense. It's true that after the regulatory pressure, that rate has decreased. The rate at which companies create ICOs has decreased. And as the result of the pressure, we have received STO. And as we briefly mentioned, STO stands for Security Token Offering, which is basically a traditional financial asset, which is using blockchain to be issued and to be managed. However, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the only problem with STOs is that there are no exchanges right now that support STOs. And so as the result of this, what we got is initial exchange offering. So what is the difference between initial exchange offering and an ICO? In both cases, the token is being released by a product or a project on a blockchain. However, in the first case, in the case with ICO, the token is being issued by a product or a company, and the purchase can happen on the website. Whereas when we're talking about IEO, the token is being offered on an exchange. Another difference between ICO and IEO is that the startup conducting the token sale in the case of the ICO, whereas when we talk about IEO, the cryptocurrency exchange itself is involved. And that leads to a whole host of issues and benefits, and some say disadvantages when it comes to IEO. So, for example, many of the exchanges right now, regardless of where they are located in terms of regulatory framework, they do require their clients to conduct an AML and KYC for users. And so as a result, you have to be a verified person to be able to participate in IEO and purchase the token. Another potential benefit of launching an IEO is that you have to have a relatively low budget. I remember when the ICO boom was happening, the costs of launching an ICO could be something up to $1 million, which was a lot and kind of defeated the purpose of having a new way of crowdsourcing for your ideas. Whereas when we talk about IEO, the projects are typically pre-vetted by exchanges because exchanges do care about the public appearance, the public face, and exchange is directly interested in actively marketing the token of the startup.
At the same time, Slava, sorry to interrupt you, an exchange will pre-vet a project purely based on its marketing budget, on its own marketing budget. It doesn't want to waste marketing effort and resources on a project that probably won't get very far off Launchpad. So I think that the ones that do come through on the IEO have passed a certain litmus test, if I can put it that way, and could be advantageous, especially if you're looking at it from the consumer point of view.
I agree with you, Wes. When I reach out to people on LinkedIn or when someone adds to me, I just saw so many advisors. I believe like every second person on LinkedIn at some point was a trusted blockchain ICO advisor. It was really funny to me because I think it was just adding to the hype. Whereas when we're talking about an exchange, it definitely has a lot more social capital and it's going to pre-vet the project to make sure that it's actually aiming to use the funds respectively and to their business plan. And so I do think this is very true.
The way I see
Go for it, Suyash.
So the way I see it is like, for me, there has been a linear evolution from ICOs to STOs. And IEOs are, in my opinion, quite different in the sense that even if there was the STO step, IEOs would have been the natural evolution because we know how difficult it is to launch an ICO, how much it costs, the marketing costs, and setting up and gathering the community around it. And all these things are already present in exchanges. So it was a natural evolution, irrespective of the evolution from ICOs to STOs. I also believe that ICOs it was a very good thing to happen in the crypto space because for like startups like me, for entrepreneurs like me, raising funds, especially in third world countries, is really, really difficult. And this was a way to really start something without the regulations. As an entrepreneur, of course, I think everyone hates regulations. At a certain point, it was necessary to regulate the market, and that's why STOs, security tokens, came forward. So for me, I think the next step would be IEOs, but irrespective of whether they will continue or not, ICOs and STOs will still be a big part of crowdfunding and the way companies will raise funds in the future.
Okay, if we accept that it's sort of a linear evolution from ICOs to IEOs, then ICOs being touted as democratizing fundraising, bringing it out to everybody, removing the gatekeepers, all those slug lines. How would that apply then if you look at an IEO? Then you've put back in the resemblance of the old way of doing things where there's a gatekeeper now. And just like you would have to go to a venture capitalist or venture funding firm, and they would vet, etc., and they would They won't let the market decide. They would decide upfront and filter out projects. Are we not progressing back towards the same old way of thinking there? Just a thought.
It's a very interesting question. I would not agree with that necessarily, because if you're launching an ICO and conducting a successful crowd sale, you still have to go to an exchange and you still have to figure out a way to list your token on an exchange. What's not happening with IEOs is that the token is already on an exchange, and we assume that an exchange did due diligence on the project and ensures that it's not a fraudulent type of project.
From a technical perspective on my end, I found something very interesting is that the way ICOs and STOs work are quite different, are fundamentally different, in the sense that ICOs, as you mentioned, it's very, very decentralized. That was basically based on the initial idea of blockchains. But STOs, on the other hand, if you drill down to the smart contracts part, we can see that it's not completely decentralized. Actually, some of the functions for STOs, like if you want to transfer from one person to another, requires the outside intervention of a third-party entity. Like it could be a KYC company or regulator, anyone like that, who would give the permission to actually do the transfer. So in that sense, STOs are quite going in the completely opposite direction of ICOs. But this is, I think, how things are currently with regulations and STOs.
In other words, to conform the security token offerings, to conform with regulations within the territories that they are operating or their clients are operating, they have had to add code to the actual token smart contract or coin itself in order to abide by the security laws.
And another important thing that comes into perspective is the role of oracles. Like regulators could become oracles. So now the question comes, how to ensure the integrity of these oracles or the centralization of these oracles. So it brings a whole other set of problems on the table.
I hear you. Okay. But in terms of ICOs versus STOs versus IEOs, they coexist, right? Are they still doing ICOs or are ICOs dead in the water now?
Okay, yeah. Number one thing right now is just to help if there's somebody new coming in. It can seem weird, like what are all these things? But in the end, we're basically not changing too much. There's new technology. In the end, we still have products and services, or we should, if it's not a scam. And we also have money, but we have digital money. That's one of the main differences, right? With cryptographic assets, cryptographically secured and implemented assets, we have a new form of money, and we might have new types of services, but we still have products and money. So depending on the kind of platform, it's either decentralized or centralized or semi-centralized.
Varying degrees of centralization or decentralization.
And even that is open to opinion and interpretation. And for example, some communities will say, we have the most decentralized project. That's not a fact. That's an opinion. But I'd like to say Slava was right that ICOs are not generating that much revenue due to multiple reasons. But that's not to say that ICOs are done. If you guys go to ICO data, ICO, DATA, and then .io, you can look through the different numbers from year to year. So quickly, in terms of money, 90 million, ICOs generated 90 million in 2016, and there were a total of 29 ICOs. The following year, 2017, ICOs generated over 6.2 billion. And a lot of them were scams. There were 887 ICOs, but According to reports, a lot of money did go into actual legitimate projects. And last year in 2018, over $7.8 billion went to ICOs, and there were 1,258 at least ICOs. But this year, the numbers are like way down because people are maybe exploring other ways of investing, like security tokens, decentralized finance. They're also using initial exchange offerings. But in the end, the token or coin you receive from an ICO or from an IEO may not be fundamentally different from what you'd receive from either one of those. But Suesh is right that there is something coded inside the smart contracts which algorithmically builds in regulations. So you are regulating through code instead of through traditional methods.
Well, that summarizes it pretty well. But in essence, from a usability point of view, besides having to KYC between transfers or having extra steps to do, one would hold an ICO token or coin in much the same way as they would hold any of the other of the two in a wallet, just like you would with Bitcoin or an Ethereum. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And also conceptually, if you look at a wallet, ideally to the end user, a cryptocurrency wallet, if you log into your online bank account, if you log into your cryptocurrency wallet, you can see assets in front of you. You can see your USD balance and you can see your Bitcoin balance. But we all know, or like people who work in this field know, that technologically and conceptually, the way that is being carried out is totally, completely different. I mean, the implementation is like, you can't say they're the same thing from a technical point of view.
Okay, and so here's another question for you, Slava. Why is it that ICOs got such a bad reputation from the beginning of 2018 onwards? I would say the whole of 2018. There's a lot of bad news, a lot of bad characterizing of ICOs. What caused that?
Because many of these projects wanted to build spaceships, but they didn't get far. And so when the spaceship started falling apart, whether it's because the technology was not possible to create, or there were internal problems within the team which didn't allow for the project to move forward, that created a lot of bad rep for the whole ICO community. There's a lot of hype and a lot of value created by Bitcoin went into these ICOs. Became a vicious cycle where projects could not meet deadlines and create what they were planning to do. So in a sense, with ICOs, we saw a typical mania when the markets grew without having real value, and then the market crashed. Some people generated a lot of money in the process. A lot of people lost money. That wasn't the first time, as it happened before in the history. It's a very interesting phenomenon in economics. The second reason is certainly the regulators that saw the whole thing, everything that was happening in the industry, and they stepped in. And in the process of trying to find out and understand what was happening, they started closing a lot of ICOs and applying pressure to them because those products, whether they were good or bad, did not fall into the framework, the existing securities framework. I think it's a natural, the whole, in the grand scheme of things, the boom and bust of ICOs is a natural progression of the market. And while I am skeptical about token offerings in general at this point in time, for a number of reasons that I think we all touched upon, I think if we look at a longer picture, that was a beneficial boom and bust for the whole industry, because it allowed to attract a lot of attention and allowed to create a lot of very valuable technology that might be not working right now, but definitely could be applied down the road.
I have a question. You said that was the mania that we experienced with ICOs. What was the attraction for the end user? We've spoken about for the project to raise money, to an easier form of capital raising. What was the attraction for the end user? Why was there such a mania into buying these things?
That's a great question. I genuinely think, and I've looked at many different projects and have spoken with a number of them, worked on several. I think that the value that the end user saw first and foremost was gaining the quick revenue, the quick profit. Because what typically would happen is that if you get into the ICO first, you get a discount when the token is released on the market. Given that the whole market has an upward movement, you can capitalize on that and exit the position and generate profit from that. That was true for about 8 months. Then the bubble bursted and the general public lost interest in the ICO mania.
So if I understand correctly, the attraction was buying at a discount, early upfront, early investor. And at the time that the funding rounds were completed, you were looking at your token or your coin being worth more than what you paid. And you would sell it to the next person, I presume, on an exchange.
Yes, buy low, sell high. It's just that the dynamics of the market was really strong, and the whole market was moving up. And there was literally almost no barrier to entry. So that added fuel to the fire. Absolutely, buy low, sell high.
Okay, that would require the liquidity in terms of being able to offload the tokens that you've invested in. That would more than likely require the token to be listed on an exchange. That would be a big challenge for a token launching company, an ICO or one of the others. Besides the IEO, which automatically, by virtue of being involved with an exchange, will be immediately on exchange at launch. So as an investor, it just comes to mind that you would probably lean towards investing in an IEO rather than an ICO, that the future may be a bit more uncertain in terms of that liquidity, the risk being higher that you'll be able to liquidate your position back into Bitcoin or fiat. That's fair to assume. That, in my mind, also opens up a lot of shenanigans, if I can put it that way, with ICOs and perhaps even STOs.
I very much agree with your conclusion that the consolidation of the ecosystem, which was created around the ICO hype, has led to initial exchange offering, which reduces the number of risks for a typical investor.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I would, just as a consumer, the guy on the street, I would lean towards investing in an IEO as it stands right now, as opposed to an ICO, where especially if I know that the exchange is a well-known exchange, fairly reputable, and has deep liquidity, I would be more comfortable investing in a token that they're backing. Firstly and foremost, because I'll be able to liquidate my position if I wanted to.
And something to add in here is that one of the main factors of ICO projects, not when they wanted to get this on exchanges with a high price that these exchanges charge, and that might not be different actually in IEOs, because even if these projects are taking advantage of the existing community, of the existing user base, in some cases, I believe that they will still pay the high premium to be listed in an exchange, along with a percentage of the amount that they are raising. So in terms of pricing, I don't think it changes a lot in terms of economics, but maybe just change in terms of how these projects, these ICO, STO projects, will reach to the right audience.
Well, I think if you're thinking about doing an ICO yourself, a big part of the success of that ICO would probably be exchange listings. If you have exchange listings, it's more likely that people would be willing to invest in that. It's sort of a stamp of approval, if I can put it that way. So an IEO, in my mind, would probably have that value built into it.
It does, and at the same time, it kind of doesn't, because, for example, you could have an exchange that's reasonably well known, and they might decide to offer a coin or a token, but how can they actually guarantee that the other company that produced that coin, how can they guarantee that that company will deliver on its promises? I mean, by facilitating the launch of that coin, they're not necessarily making themselves commit. The exchange itself is not really making a commitment.
Sure, and the exchange can't guarantee that company is going to be any more committed to their project and produce results and a working product, a functioning platform, or what be it, any more than it would be, let's say, if they were doing it on their own as an ICO. But it does give a certain level of confidence that the token will be listed, for example, there'll be liquidity, you'll be able to trade in and out of the token. And I think that plays a big part into at least the sales part of the process being a success. On the other hand, the delivery of the product and the development of whatever that platform is that's been promised up front, yes, I agree. I don't think that the exchange will have too much influence over that. And you will probably still see some fall through the cracks where, they fail, if I can put it that way.
I believe another thing that was happening in the industry with the boom and bust of ICO is that a lot of the projects that, especially mid-tier projects that raised a good amount of money, but because of the declining market, many of them had kept funds in cryptocurrency. So their capitalization was decreasing as the market was sinking. At the same time, let's assume that it's a good project and was working on developing technology, so it had to pay out salaries. Marketing is a big part of any ICO. Because there is no utility right at this point, as the project is building the technology, they would have to hire a market maker. There's a whole host of companies, organizations that provide market making services. What that means is that they're creating a market for their token by continuously buying and selling the asset. So a lot of these projects ran out of money because their funds were in cryptocurrency. And so the market, what we are continuing to see is that a lot of exchanges would clear themselves out of the tokens which either do not have enough funds or they're not delivering on their promise. So demand and supply works. If you're not creating value, at some point you have to leave the market. And so that is an additional layer of security when it comes to initial exchange offering. Let's assume that this IEOs raise a lot of funds, but if they do not deliver on the promise, they're going to run out of money sooner or later and they'll have to exit the market and an exchange will delist this coin.
Makes sense. It makes sense. Survival of the fittest, basically, in that scenario. In terms of regulation, the STOs, we've covered that a lot of them try and conform to existing regulations, securities laws. In terms of IEOs, I assume via the exchange wanting to conform to regulations, the IEOs will abide by what the exchange is abiding by. You mentioned a change in stance or some advice or a document that was released recently, Slava. You mentioned that in our last podcast with regards to the SEC. Now, in light of the fact that we've covered a bit of ICO, STO, and IEO, could you cover just a little bit for the listener what that actually means in terms of regulation going forward?
Sure, absolutely. So we have two general types of coin offerings. So the first type, if we're talking about the American market specifically, your coin, if you're releasing a coin on blockchain, it can either fall under the security regulations. And in America, just like in many other countries, they're very strict, or it can fall in the other camp, which we typically call utility tokens. That no action letter, which was released by SEC, outlined conditions under which, if the token is released, and how it has to behave in order not to fall into the securities category. Then by default, regulators in America cannot go after you because you're not falling, your project is not falling under the existing framework. It's interesting that one of the notions of a security in the US is that you will be listing your token on an exchange. So when we're talking about ICOs, IEOs, STOs, from what I understand, by default, ICO and initial exchange offerings would classify the tokens under the existing security laws. And therefore, you would have to meet a lot of strict guidelines and regulations imposed by US regulators. If we're talking about STO, therefore, by default, you're meeting regulations. There are several exemptions. One of them, the most famous one, is Reg A, which I believe this is the exemption that was used by Telegram to raise a large sum of money for the Tron project. And there are other options as well. That is a very general bird's eye overview of the situation.
Okay, just throwing it out to everybody here. We've got the three different versions of these tokens for fundraising. Will there be a fourth?
Good question.
Yeah, what we saw I've said a long while back that blockchain is not a revolution, but it's an evolution. I still stand by my words. I believe what we saw over the last year and a half with Bitcoin raising in value, Ethereum being created, and a lot of ICOs launching, and we observed boom and bust, is that there's this continuous disconnect between many regulators and blockchain projects. I think we might see another version of a coin offering, maybe even several of them, as companies try to escape from regulators. If that will happen, regulators will probably step in and pay more attention to these projects and enforcing the existing framework. But I also think that the existing frameworks are not very well fitted to regulate blockchain, and therefore they have to be adjusted. So just like in any market, there should be an equilibrium price, if you wish, between the regulators, the market, the community, and the projects themselves. So they have to find the middle ground where all the conditions are met, the projects are conducted in fair fashion, and regulators are happy with what is happening.
Fair enough. Great answer. Guys, on that note, let's call it a wrap. I think we've covered enough detail on the three different types of fundraising mechanisms, ICOs, STOs, and IEOs. Let's delve a little bit deeper on the next podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.